He must be removed before the council meets.
The Emperor suspects nothing.
Today, we're diving into one of the most dramatic and pivotal moments of the entire 20th century. It's a story about the violent overthrow of a democracy, the tragic death of its president, and a deep personal betrayal that would change a nation forever. This is the story of the fall of Salvador Allende. Know that much sooner than later, the great avenues will open again where free men will walk to build a better society. Just imagine hearing those words crackle over the radio. Those were the final defiant words of President Salvador Allende, broadcast from inside the presidential palace while it was under attack, bombed by his own military.
So let's start at the end. On a September 11th that shook the world long before 2001, how on earth did a democratically elected government come to such a fiery, violent conclusion? Picture it, your nation's own Air Force, screaming through the sky over the capital city, dropping bombs on the very symbol of your government. That was the unbelievable scene in Santiago. The military, the one institution meant to protect the state, was now its destroyer. To understand how things got to this point, we have to go back. To really get the full picture, we need to rewind the clock to 1970. The Cold War is at its peak, and Chile, this long, narrow country at the edge of the world, decides to do something completely different. Something no one had ever tried before. Allende's vision was called the Chilean path to socialism. Now, this wasn't a violent revolution like in Cuba. No, this was an attempt, the first of its kind anywhere in the world, to build a socialist society through the ballot box, using the democratic system that was already in place. It was a hugely ambitious experiment, and believe me, the whole world was watching. And his government, a coalition called the Popular Unity, they moved fast. They nationalized the country's single most valuable resource, copper, taking it right out of the hands of American corporations. They took control of the banks, sped up land reforms to break up massive estates, and poured money into social programs and education. The whole point was a radical redistribution of wealth and power. But, you know, a bold experiment like this doesn't happen in a vacuum. Almost immediately, Allende's government found itself getting squeezed by these immense forces, both from outside the country and from right there at home. And right here, you see this massive collision of two different worlds. On one side, you've got Allende's dream for a people's state, but on the other, you have the cold, hard reality of the Cold War. We now know, thanks to declassified documents, that President Richard Nixon gave a secret, direct order to the CIA. His words were simple: make the economy scream. The goal was clear: destabilize Chile so badly that Allende's government would just collapse. And this wasn't just talk. The money trail tells the whole story. The CIA poured millions of dollars into funding opposition parties, anti-Allende media outlets, and strikes. There was even an operation with the code name Project Fubelt, which was specifically designed to trigger a military coup to stop Allende from ever even taking office. It was a sustained, well-funded campaign of economic and political warfare. But the pressure wasn't only coming from the outside. Back at home, Allende's radical changes were splitting the country in two. Sure, a lot of poor and working-class Chileans saw their lives get better, at least at first. But the middle and upper classes, along with most business owners, they felt like they were under attack. The economy started to grind to a halt, there were shortages, massive protests, and crippling strikes that paralyzed the entire country. In this climate of extreme tension, the big political story suddenly narrows. It becomes a personal one, a story of trust and a truly catastrophic misjudgment. And it all centers on one man, General Augusto Pinochet. On August 23, 1973, less than 3 weeks before the coup, Allende promoted Pinochet to the highest position in the army. You see, Allende saw him as a constitutionalist soldier, a total professional who put loyalty to the law above politics. And this wasn't just blind faith. It was based on Chile's long, proud tradition of a non-political military. Allende was a lifelong Democrat. He fundamentally believed in the country's institutions, and he believed Pinochet would defend democracy, not destroy it. The betrayal unfolded with just shocking speed. In June, after a failed coup attempt, Pinochet actually seemed loyal. In August, Allende gives him the big promotion. But then, in early September, he gets not one but two secret warnings from Argentina's president Juan Perón, flat out telling him Pinochet is the one leading a conspiracy. And then, just days later, on September 11th, the betrayal is complete. And here's the most tragic part. Allende heard the warnings, but he simply couldn't believe them. According to one of Perón's top aides, he just dismissed the seriousness of it all because he was convinced that Pinochet's loyalty was, in his words, unquestionable. It was a fatal misreading of the very man he had just empowered.
Which brings us right back to that chaotic morning. With Pinochet now secretly leading the conspiracy, the plan to destroy the government went into motion with absolute ruthless efficiency.
The day's events unfolded like a grim countdown. At 7:35 in the morning, Allende arrives at the palace, determined to make his stand. By 10:15, he's giving that famous last speech over the radio. The military offers him a plane to safely leave the country. He flatly refuses. Just before noon, the bombing begins. And by 2:20 in the afternoon, it's all over. President Allende is dead.
And inside that burning, besieged palace, a personal tragedy was unfolding within the larger one. Allende's close friend and advisor, a journalist nicknamed El Perro, or the dog, took his own life. The people who were there said that seeing his friend die is what hardened Allende's resolve to never surrender, to stay until the very end. But the exact circumstances of Allende's death became this national obsession. For almost 4 decades, the country was just torn apart by this question. Did he take his own life in a final act of defiance, or was he murdered by the soldiers who stormed the palace? Well, finally, in 2011, science provided an answer. His body was exhumed, and an international team of forensic experts conducted a brand new autopsy. Their conclusion was unanimous and clear. Salvador Allende died from a self-inflicted wound from the AK-47 rifle he was holding. It was a suicide, seen by his supporters not as surrender, but as a final refusal to be captured by the men who had betrayed him.
The death of the president and the fall of his government, that wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. The beginning of a new, dark, and brutal chapter in Chile's history.
In the coup's aftermath, General Pinochet seized absolute power. The entire socialist experiment was violently ripped out and replaced with one of the world's most radical free market economic models. Congress was shut down, political parties were banned, and a campaign of systematic terror was unleashed. Over 40,000 people were executed, tortured, or became political prisoners. The military dictatorship that began on September 11, 1973, would rule Chile for 17 brutal years, leaving scars on the nation that are still visible today. And so the story of Allende's fall leaves us with a haunting question, one that feels just as relevant today as it did back then. It forces us to wonder about the fragility of our own democratic systems and to ask just how much pressure from hostile foreign powers and from our own deep internal divisions can any democracy truly withstand before it finally breaks.